Let's Talk Prevention Idaho. This podcast is a production led by the statewide nonprofit Community Coalitions of Idaho, or CCI. Here at CCI, it is our job to support the work of prevention across the state of Idaho through education, training, and providing valuable resources. We help make the work of prevention happen all across Idaho. This podcast will update listeners on what CCI is doing from week to week, as well as provide information for vital professionals in Idaho across the country. All right, everybody, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We have been on a slight hiatus as we get things figured out, coming in and out of COVID and summer and everything else. It's been an amazing ride, and we have some really cool things coming up on the docket. And I really want to thank everybody who has been working in Idaho prevention. One of our big things that we have been able to stake our claim on is we are that island in the West Coast where we have no legalization for marijuana cannabis. So I really want to just thank everybody for all the work they're doing, from our folks who are embedded in the legislature to those of you working at the ground level. There's some really cool things that we have been working on over the spring and summer to bring you some amazing content. You've been at some of the programming, you've been to some of the conferences, and we're just really thankful that everybody is really digging in. We have an amazing board. Everybody's just super supportive now. So I want to thank everybody. So Let's Talk Prevention is moving into the next season, and we're going to kick off this season by talking to some of the presenters. This is one of the things I've always wanted to do with this podcast. Was we have these events two of these events every single year. We have bring in these amazing people to speak, whether they're from Idaho or out, and we never get a chance to really talk to them a little more in depth and get you excited for what they're going to be bringing to Idaho, and maybe have something that you can refer back to if you missed something in the presentation that maybe you'll be able to grasp here in the podcast, and it'll remind you of the thing that really excited you about a particular workshop or keynote. So we're kicking off with our fall prevention conference is coming up in Moscow, Idaho, October 3rd and 4th, and we've got, man, I don't think I've ever spent so much money on a conference before in my life, but this one is very important. One, because we've seen the new drug of choice, fentanyl. We learned in CADCA that's the actual the correct chemical compound way to say it, not fentanyl but fentanyl. So we learned that already. But up in the northern region of Idaho, we're really seeing that has really been ground zero for a lot of the fentanyl overdoses. So it's great that we're bringing it to region 2, so that all the north folks can very easily get to it, try to take all those hurdles out. But we're really excited. We got a chance. I've actually bumped into Stephen a couple times as he started his career in this whole speaking engagement around prevention and drug use and what it looks like and coming out of it and everything. And I'm so glad that he circled back around with us, because we're able to bring him and his father in to do some really amazing keynotes to anchor this conference and really get us thinking creatively. We've done some really cool things here in Idaho to bring in some amazing speakers, us and the Department of Corrections and others, on how we look at the different ways that we look at our youth when they're in substance abuse issues or whether they're in the criminal justice system. How do we look at these situations differently so that we can get a better outcome? Because even though we are very heavily penalized focus in our mindset here in Idaho, it is great to say, okay, we're doing this now, but how can we be doing it better without going as far as just straight out legalizing or just decriminalizing and saying it'll take care of itself, because it won't take care of itself. We need strategies that we can implement to help people as they suffer through. So Stephen, thanks a lot for joining us on this podcast. I know you're a super busy man, so really appreciate you taking a few minutes of your time out to talk to us.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, David, for having me. I love to do these before I come out. I think it's a good way to, like you said, to get people excited, to give people some information. So thanks for having me on.
So give us a little background on how you got to where you are today. I mean, I know it's a mouthful, but give us the cliff notes of kind of why you. What's the
I've actually been asked that question before. Why you? You know, how did this really happen? How did you get in front of us today? I've actually had students ask me that question. And the truth is, this really happened organically. I struggled with the substance use disorder for a little over 10 years. I did not have a really bad experience as a child. I didn't have some traumatic experience that led me down that path. I did struggle with ADHD as a kid. I did struggle in school. I was prescribed amphetamines early on, and that definitely contributed to low self-esteem, low self-confidence in my academics. But one area that I really excelled in was sports and in athletics, and that was a great thing for me. And one of the things that happened to me in 8th grade was I had made a junior varsity lacrosse team. So I'm this middle school student playing a high school sport, and I'm playing with freshmen, sophomores, even a few juniors. And as great as that was for me athletically, socially and emotionally, probably not the right move. It's where I was introduced to drugs and alcohol, and I started down that path. I had this low self-esteem. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be cool. I didn't have the self-confidence to refuse when it was offered to me. And I ended up going down a path that's pretty common when you see people end up addicted to opioids at the end. I started with nicotine, marijuana, and alcohol my freshman year, eventually moved along to drugs like Xanax, cocaine, found opioid painkillers, and eventually heroin. I struggled in school. I'm talking in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expelled, kicked off of sports teams. I experienced basically all of that bad reputation, barely graduated high school, failed out of numerous colleges, was in and out of treatment, arrested multiple times. And at 24 years old, I had felony cases in 2 different states. I had no idea what to do with myself. I lost all my friends. I lost my family. And I had basically given up all hope. Everyone else basically gave up hope on me, and then I lost hope in myself. But I was lucky. I was afforded an opportunity to go to a long-term treatment program, which is what saved my life. My probation officer said to me, "You can go to jail or treatment, and you choose." And I only went to jail. I only went to treatment because I didn't want to go to jail. And what happened was while I was in this treatment program, my brain and my body started to heal, right? I think in this country, we look at mental health and physical health very differently, right? When at 19 years old, I made a really bad choice and got on the back of a 4-wheeler, flipped off a cliff, and broke my leg very badly. And it took a little over a year for me to really fully heal. It's the same thing with substance use. The longer you use, the worse the substance, the longer it takes for your brain and body to heal. And that's what happened to me. So I was in this program around month 6, and they had a relationship. It was in Connecticut, had a relationship with a local high school. And the health teacher called over and asked, "Can you send a few young guys to come over and speak?" And so they picked me and 2 other guys. And I remember I went there, I'm standing in the hallway. The health teacher comes out, she greets us. And I remember saying to her, "What do you want me to say?" And she said, "Just speak from the heart and don't glorify." And so I went in there and I spoke from the heart. I certainly didn't glorify drug and alcohol use. And she thanked us. And not too long after that, the program director calls us in and hands me this manila envelope. And it's full of letters, thank you letters from the students and the teacher. And what was so fulfilling for me was just the positive feedback. And what was really moving was the amount of students that were willing to talk about what's going on with them in this letter. Some of them were struggling personally. Some of them were going home and their brothers and sisters struggle every day. Some of them, their parents, right? And so you just realize how this affects all different walks of life. I ended up working at that treatment program for a year after I went through there for a year. So I was there for about 2 years. It's actually what helped me avoid jail and prison was because I got this full-time job with this treatment program. I went through there for a full year, was doing the right thing, was going back to school part-time. I eventually left my job with that treatment program to go back to school, majoring in criminal justice. I got my degree from John Jay, and then I went to law school to become an attorney, so I could also put some of my focus helping people with mental health and substance use disorders get treatment instead of just throwing them in jail or prison, where I truly believe the person just gets worse, not better. And as I was going through school, I knew I needed to show a little bit more in order to get into law school. So I officially started my own organization called Speak Sobriety. And I wanted to go around sharing my story with a focus on prevention. I had no idea where it was going to go when I first started speaking. I was lucky to even get one or two schools or coalitions to agree to bring me in. And that's basically what happened is I got lucky with a few schools who were willing to give me a shot very early on. And I did a lot of practicing, a lot of talking, a lot of research, a lot of studying, and it just kind of took off from there. Every time I would speak somewhere, a school would refer me to another school, another coalition. And this is, I'm about to start my 7th school year doing this officially. And I've had the opportunity to present for over 400 different schools and coalitions all across the country. It's certainly my passion. And with what's going on right now with mental health and drug overdoses in particular because of fentanyl, it's truly insane. And so I feel that these messages are so important to hear now on the prevention side of it. Also early intervention, you talked about, criminal justice. I also talk about, school policy, kids who are struggling, do you want to just give them out of school suspension, kick them off sports teams, label them a bad kid, and trying to get people to look at things differently, especially kids who don't have a great family life, who struggle in different ways. You talk to a kid for a short period of time, you might find out pretty quickly why it is they're acting the way they are. And instead of approaching them with the mindset, well, we need to punish this person and teach them a lesson, I try and say, how can we help this kid? And that's really what I'm trying to do here, is just trying to help young people who are struggling, to prevent those who are right on the edge from going down that path, to empower those who are the leaders to really understand how their actions affect other people, and to get adults to maybe be a little bit more understanding and compassionate and switch their thinking a little bit on how you approach someone who's struggling.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked, being a former high school athlete myself, I never was injured to the point where I needed to, be put on painkillers or anything, thank God. But one of the things when we were talking early on, when we were planning out this opportunity for you to come out and speak to us, was the fact that we commonly find ourselves when a kid gets in trouble with using substances, we seem to pull every single internal support in their life right out of the way, and then we expect them to, okay, now you need to go get better from this debilitating thing that is now part of your life. And I was like, that's true. It was like my coaches, my teammates, they were a big part of, heck, that was the only reason why I got good grades, is so that I could play. So had I had all that pulled away from me, that might have made things a lot more difficult. So that was kind of neat, that whole outlook, especially you have a video, right? That little promo video that you have out kind of talking about your story. And
yeah, and we really tried to focus on that and the stigma, and how taking things away from kids, that these protective factors, really only makes things worse, especially when you're dealing with someone whose brain is not fully developed. If I'm 16 years old, I'm going through puberty, I have behavioral issues, I have a substance use disorder, I have ADHD, and I act out in a way, and you scream at me and ask me, what are you thinking? Why'd you do that? What's wrong with you? Most of the time, my answer is going to be, I don't know. I don't even know why I did that. And then after the fact, I would think, why did I even do that? And it's because, my frontal lobe, it's not fully developed. A lot of my decisions are based on impulse. And so instead of just yelling and screaming and punishing a person, what I try and get people to do is to try and sit down, talk with them. There do have to be consequences, but I'm a believer in adding more protective factors in a person's life, not removing them, right? It could be something, if you want someone to miss a game, but they have to suit up, they have to be part of the team, they have to stand on the sidelines, they have to have a good attitude, maybe they have to run extra sprints, maybe they have to help clean up, maybe they have to stay after school and get their grades up with one of their teachers or a tutor, volunteer, be mentored by an older student who's on a really good path, mandatory counseling. I don't care what it is, as long as we're thinking, okay, I don't want to remove something that's good in this person's life. I want to add more in order to try and keep them in that positive state of mind, that positive environment, because if you don't have purpose, what do you have?
Yeah, and that, thinking back, I was never, outside of baseball, I think I was never really the player that the coach was going to put in, but I wanted to make sure I was at every practice. I want to make sure that I knew that I was giving 110% so I could play in those games. So I really think that's a good idea. It should be at practice. That's how you're working together as a team. Just because you made a poor choice, you're still part of this team. You still need to be here with your teammates. And yeah, I love all that. It was really, really cool stuff. And then too, something in the video that really stood out was your parents they said we never gave up on him. We always wanted to make sure that he knew that we supported him. And your siblings even speaking there about the difficulty about, you're having such a really hard time, and there's three other kids in the house. So you're the balancing act. So is that kind of explain to us how your father will play a role during this conference? Why is he coming out to speak? What will he be able to do?
You hit it right on the head there. It's a really hard thing to determine, am I helping my child or am I enabling my child when you get to that point, right? And the message that my parents are trying to send is, there may have been times where their expectations or their hope was very low or almost gone, but they still never gave up. And it was never the kick him out, let him hit rock bottom, let him figure it out on his own. Because when you think about it, the deeper you are into an addiction and what that does to your brain and your way of thinking and your way of living, yeah, sure, it can happen, but you're just getting worse, not better. So why do you think that this miracle is just going to happen where this person just magically one day figures it out? What happened is what they said to me towards the end was, if you want help, we are here for you. But until that time, we can't be part of this. We will not enable this any further. And so I had to get to a point where I was willing to say, they call it the gift of desperation. I'm willing to do anything to get better. And even though I wasn't sure if it was even possible, even if it was possible, would I even be happy in recovery, right? But what happened was, like I said before, is when you're in an environment and when you're around positive people and you're practicing healthy habits, you start to get better, kind of like fake it till you make it thing. And so while I started doing that, all of a sudden I started to get better. And then I got to a point where I really understood what health and wellness meant, and it was something that I didn't do for anybody else, not for the courts, not for mom, not for dad. It was for myself. And once I was able to get to that point, that's where the sky was the limit. And I realized, once I was able to overcome this, there's nothing that I can't do, because I don't think I'll ever face something as hard as this. And that's a message I try and tell people all the time. I spoke once in a high school. I finished my presentation and this principal came up to me and she said, "You found a way to take your mess and you turned it into a message. Bravo." And that resonated so much with me. And I think that's what life is all about. no matter what you do, you're going to have your struggles, right? It could be mental health, substance use, could be financial struggles, could be trauma, mental disability, physical disability, whatever the case may be. It's not about the struggle. It's about being able to overcome it, ask for help, find purpose in it, and then maybe use it to help somebody else, because there's somebody else out there going through the same thing. And we shouldn't be able to have to go through this stuff alone.
Yeah, I think about like one of my favorite pitchers of all time was Jim Abbott, was the one-handed pitcher for the Angels,
We
and
have the same birthday.
it blew me away that he could not only perform at the major league level with one hand, but he could perform at the level he did. Like,
It's amazing. Yeah,
he would catch balls hit directly back at him.
That's resilience at its finest. I actually had to do in 5th grade. I had to do a birthday book on somebody, on a famous person who has the same birthday as you, and I picked Jim Abbott for that reason. That's amazing you brought that up. And I get it. That's what it's all about, is being able to, like this principal said to me, take your mess and turn it into a message. Find strength in overcoming these struggles. And it's something, if you're willing to talk about openly too, it gets other people to open up. I think that's one of the most powerful things about what I do, especially when I'm speaking to young people, to middle schools and high schools, is I go in and I share some moments that I'm not so proud of. It's not all, the comeback story. The beginning's the downfall. And so I share some moments and some things that I'm certainly not proud of, that, were really a tough time for me. But when you do that openly, it gets other people to think, well, maybe I can talk about what's going on with me. And I get to hear from them, especially, afterwards. Sometimes during the Q&A, people will ask things or make statements openly. People will come up to me after me personally and talk to me about what's going on. And that's what this is all about. A lot of times schools learn about kids that they didn't even know were struggling, because when someone in front of you is willing to do it, it motivates other people to start talking. And talking is what we need to, is the beginning to change, have a change in action.
We especially learned that with COVID, right? The isolation didn't do anything but compound problems. We didn't know about these problems, but now these unknown problems now have this whole thing where we're not even around other people that can help us walk and talk through these things. So it really kind of, like I said, I think it brought a lot of things that were under the surface more, like right over the surface, and like a pimple that you couldn't see, and all of a sudden the pressure of all the isolation brought a lot of things to head. So one of the, I know we're trying to keep these keynotes all about primary prevention, but as you and I both know, that now with drugs like fentanyl, however you want to say it, that's no longer the case, because we could literally go from prevention to death in a matter of seconds, right?
Yeah, that's what has really changed since I've been in recovery. So I've been in recovery for almost 10 years. And I've said this to many people: if the landscape of substance use, what it is today, if it was like that 10 years ago when I was using, I am almost positive, if not positive, that I would have died of an overdose or fentanyl poisoning. Because with the amount that I was using, all it takes is one pill, and oxycodone was my drug of choice. Those 30 milligram oxycodone towards the end, it's basically all I was using. And today the market is saturated with those, except it's not oxycodone, it's fentanyl. And it's so important today for us to talk about prevention, to raise awareness, and to intervene early. The experimental phase it's just over. It is. I get it. You're a young person, you're curious, you make mistakes. And a lot of times parents say things like that to me. Oh, well, I was in college and I smoked marijuana. I'm like, well, first of all, even that too, right? Like, I was in college and I smoked marijuana. Whatever marijuana you smoked 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was, it's long gone. Some of this marijuana, especially the THC concentrate, we're talking 90% THC. You got a kid with a mental health struggle, couple times too many, and now you have someone going into substance-induced psychosis, right? So that's way more severe. Now you're talking about, people say, well, I did experiment with drugs sometimes. Okay, fentanyl wasn't a thing then. It's pretty recent, and there is no way of knowing unless you have fentanyl testing strips, which is a whole nother controversial issue. Some people say yes, some people say no. It's a really hard thing, but there is no way of knowing unless you have that. And people take things, and I'm not saying it's any more or less tragic if somebody who has a 10-year-long addiction, like if I were to overdose at the height of my addiction, I'm not saying it's any more or less tragic, but it certainly wouldn't have been a shock if I had overdosed towards the height of my addiction. But when a kid who tries drugs 1 or 2 times, who doesn't have any issues, just wakes up one morning and decides, all right, I'm going to do something tonight, and the next day they're gone. When that happens, it is different. It is different, and we need to really focus on the prevention and the early intervention, and sometimes get people treatment and into recovery earlier than we would have before this major problem. And so what I'm starting to see is the 4 stages blend together a little bit more, with prevention, early intervention, treatment, and recovery. And you got to be careful, especially when I speak at a school. It's very different than if I were to go to a treatment center and speak to adults who have gone through this. It's definitely a different talk. But especially when you're talking about professionals who work in the field, I think you need to have a good understanding of the whole continuum in order to be effective, because it's just different today, and we need to be able to tackle all parts of it.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to tell speakers when they're like, well, who's my audience? I was like, professionals, take the gloves off. Be as frank with us as possible. We're all adults. We need to know what we need to know. Don't beat around the bush for us, because beating around the bush isn't saving anyone's life. Whether it's me working in prevention or a colleague that works in treatment, we all have the same end goal, is to reduce, eliminate, and save people's lives. So it's just take the gloves off and give it to us. Give it to me straight, doc.
Yeah, and you know what? That is what I do. That is what I do. I'm very straightforward. I'm very open. I'm very honest. I don't beat around the bush. I think that's the only way to do this. And I do concede, even speaking to students, like, I do concede sometimes. You have to be legitimate. I've had high school students ask me, seniors in particular, say, like, do you expect me to never drink alcohol ever? Right? Do you really expect that, like, none of us are ever going to drink alcohol? Like, is that what you think we should do? And of course, I'm going to say, listen, the choice is yours, right? This is all about choice and risk. Do I think that every single person here, after hearing this presentation, is never going to try alcohol? No, it's an unrealistic expectation, but I do expect people to think a little bit more, to think and feel. Right? Like, one of the things I talk about with alcohol, which is relevant to fentanyl, and people sometimes don't make the connection, is alcohol is without a doubt the #1 gateway drug, more than marijuana. And the reason why I say that is because I have surveyed so many young people about the first time they tried a substance. And this is my story too. Were you sober or drunk? Almost every time I was drunk. Somebody offers you a pill sober, you say absolutely not. Somebody offers you a pill drunk, you say, maybe I'll try it. Same thing with the powder, right? And so that's where, to me, there is a connection. And it's about choice and risk. It's crazy the way it can happen today. You could be someone without a major problem. You go out drinking one night, you go to a party, somebody brings pills, you're drunk, they give it to you, you try it, you don't even know what's in it, turns out to be fentanyl, and you die. It's that is a reality of today, and it's scary. It's scary to think about it.
We did a podcast last season with a guy who wrote a book on just about the facts of alcohol, and he actually is a reporter who was living in Europe. And he and I did not agree on the whole marijuana issue, but he agreed 110% that there is absolutely no health benefits whatsoever for alcohol in your body. It is not healthy for you whatsoever. And you're right. Me personally, when I was younger, alcohol and cigarettes always went together. If I was drinking, I was smoking.
Yep.
I would always have a cigarette. Those were the nights we smoked the most cigarettes, because it seemed to just go hand in hand. If I'm drinking a beer and playing pool with the guys, of course I'm smoking a cigarette or something. So it just went hand in hand. So you're right. It is, and it's what's hilarious is it's the one that we tried to get rid of, we never could, and so we basically embedded in our society in perpetuity, right?
Yeah, and that's part of the issue with alcohol is, and we say it too, right? We say drugs and alcohol. We don't say just drugs, even though alcohol is a drug. We put it in a separate category, and it's there for a reason. Even with parents, and I see it all the time. It does matter if a parent comes home and has a couple glasses of wine every single night. If you're drinking beers every night or most nights, and then on the weekends your kids see you getting drunk, and you're the type of parent that sits there in the lawn chair and tells your kid to go get a beer for you. I mean, you're setting yourself up for a major problem. Parents are the most influential person in their kid's life, and I'm not here to rain on anybody's parade or tell you can't have fun, but your actions do matter. And then what happens? A tragedy happens, a drunk driving death, alcohol poisoning. And what happens? Then all those parents are the ones who take to Facebook with their brilliant ideas, and it lasts for a week or two, and then they go back, and then they go away, and it goes back to the way it was before. When we are here understanding that this is a day in, day out fight, and we're really trying to turn a tanker ship around here, but we got to do it one day at a time.
Yeah, you're right. You're so right. I remember standing next to my nephew's car, talking to him, looking at his back seat and seeing tons of empty beer bottles, and car kind of reeked of weed a little bit. And I'm like, you might want to clean out your car. He's like, why? Well, it's not legal in California. You can't be driving around with open containers. Whether you're sober right now or not, you can't do that. And I was like, every party we have, everybody's drinking. So I was like, from then on out, I was like, not drinking anymore. And they'd ask me, Uncle David, why don't you have a beer? I like beer, but I don't need beer to have a good time. I can hang out with the family. We can do this. And it literally, when they said that, I was like, whoa, I'm dead set. I am dead set not drinking around these kids anymore, because they're watching so closely.
You're absolutely right. And I understand that there are some adults that can drink socially and live productive lives, and alcohol doesn't, ruin their life. And they associate alcohol with fun. And it's hard for me to do that, because I get emails and phone calls and text messages, direct messages on a weekly, if not sometimes daily basis, of these stories where alcohol is not just destroying the individual who's using it, but their family and close friends around them. Yeah. And so it's much harder for me to associate alcohol with fun. I associate alcohol with pain and suffering. And I try my best in social situations not to be the guy who kind of like brings people down, but it is difficult for me to see the fun in it. And a lot of times I see people who I can identify have a problem. They might think they're having fun, and other people around them might think, oh, this is a fun person, but I know what comes the next day.
Yeah.
After that. And so it's a little bit more difficult for me to associate the two together. But like you said, embedded in our society in perpetuity.
Yeah. So what else? What else you want to leave with our listeners before we close out this podcast? What do you want, final words, get everyone pumped up for what's going to be an amazing conference.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, especially to get to speak at not just a conference, just so many different venues. With what's going on right now with the drug epidemic coming off of COVID, I do think that this is a time where we really need to be going, full steam ahead with focusing on health and wellness and just trying to get people to get a little bit better every day. I don't think that this is the thing. This is where I kind of talked about before with like the reactive Facebook mom who just thinks that we can solve a problem in a second. That's not the way that this works, but really just making sure you never give up on somebody, keep moving forward, even celebrate the smallest wins. I was taught very early on when I was in treatment, even just making my bed every morning was something to be proud of. Trying to get these healthy habits, because prevention is so much more than simply not using drugs and alcohol. To me, it's about building a life that's worth staying sober for, building a life that's worth protecting. And so really just trying to help people get to that point, to chase their dreams, because when you have those good things in your life, you are much less likely to go down a path of drugs and alcohol and pain and suffering, because you don't need it. And why would you risk everything that you had? So really trying to get people to build a life for themselves that's worth protecting.
Is any better myself? So if you guys want to hear Stephen and his father and all the other amazing speakers that will be out at our fall prevention conference in Moscow, it's going to be at the university in Moscow, Idaho. It's right after this. So the conference is right after homecoming. So fingers crossed, everybody's good at the college game and nobody makes any poor choices. But directly following homecoming for University of Idaho, we're going to be in Moscow having some great, amazing conversations around what we need to do to be the best prevention advocates we possibly can be here in Idaho. If you are interested in attending, the jot form will be in the description of this podcast. It is October 3rd and 4th, 2022. If you're watching this afterwards, you missed out, but don't think that you can't join us for our next. We try to do these spring and fall every single year. We move them all around the state. So if you missed out on this one and you're interested in attending one of our conferences, shoot us an email. It will be in the description here in this podcast, and we will get you taken care of. So I want to thank Stephen for taking time out of his busy day to get us all pumped up, share his story a little bit, and we will see you guys in the next video. All right, guys, have a good one.
Thank you.